I'm Dylan Ratigan. I've interviewed nearly every CEO and most world leaders during the past 25 years. And now I'm bootstrapping. I'm turning my attention to the new CEOs and the irrepressible entrepreneurs leading the next generation of innovation in the world. Welcome back to Tasty Live. I am Dylan Ratigan. It's time for another episode of Bootstrapping. Our guest today, Darren Guccione. He's the co-founder and CEO of Keeper. Company sounds like it does what the name says, which is a password security system, but I'm sure Darren will give me a better description of it than I just did. Obviously, passwords and password security is a blight upon all of us, one way or the other. How does Keeper work, and how does it help us?
Well, first, it's good to be here, and thank you for the intro. But Keeper Security is the name of the company. It's keepersecurity.com is the website, and we make cybersecurity software that protects against the most common cyber attacks, typically around data breaches resulting from stolen or weak login credentials, passwords, or secrets. So we protect both humans as they interface and transact with passwords or private information, and then of course, the machine side, which is what we call infrastructure in an organization. So we basically protect everything, every computer, every endpoint, and every individual in an organization.
And I mean, to the degree to which it can be described, how does it work?
Really simple. So think of it like a defense system, right? It's like a cloak of armor around your iPhone, your Android device, any type of computing device, a tablet, a desktop computer or laptop. It's a military grade vault, runs on all your devices. You store all of your login credentials, private information, could be notes, lists, files, photos, video files, anything that you want to completely encrypt both at rest and in transit. It just protects you against that data threat, that breach threat, and what we call the dark web. So the dark web is a big factor in this because most people don't realize that, there's 20 billion login credentials that have been stolen from public data breaches. They're aggregated and they're placed on the dark web. And those are targeted against people like yourself or me, for instance, without us even realizing it. So this system that we have safeguards you and alerts you when there's a dark web type of threat.
What's the end game for security? And I guess what I'm getting at is biometrics. Is there a point where it's your fingerprint in your eyeball, it's no longer whether you can remember, the name of your first dog or all these things that we do now?
Yeah. So what we like to focus on and talk about is really like gesture-based controls. Biometrics are part of that. So using something that you have like your fingerprint or your retina or your face, and helping you more gracefully and elegantly, with security, of course, authenticate into every website application and system. So as time goes on, the technologies that are being utilized, to make that happen are becoming more prevalent, which is great. And that's really where we focus in terms of just like merging convenience and ease of use with security so that it's widely accessible and easy in terms of adoption.
And so if I'm using Keeper, does it relieve me of the need to remember 5 billion passwords?
Absolutely. So the key is you only have to remember one master password, and then you set up your biometric. And once you're done with that, you're elegantly logging into your vault from all of your devices. And from there, Keeper can create high-strength random passwords for all of your websites, applications, and systems, and authenticate it if you're in a corporate environment and you're using a more sophisticated identity application like Azure or SSO solutions. It can integrate with the tech stack. So it can, at the very minimal level, you can use it individually. That's a very simple application. And as you move upstream into a much larger organizations, we have customers with, 400,000 or 500,000 employees that use the platform right across their entire ecosystem to protect everybody and every device in the environment. So it does start with passwords because that's 80% of the data breaches out there. But then it gets into things like secrets, which are what we call, typical passwords that protect infrastructure, which, for instance, at, a company like Tasty Trade or Bootstrapping, is what makes your company operate on the back end. All of your websites, applications, and systems need to be protected as well, because that's a major attack asset, for a cyber criminal organization.
Just because of the money. So long ago, I did an interview with somebody at the Department of Energy around cybersecurity. As you may well know, the cybersecurity is actually, I believe, the portfolio of the Department of Energy, or at least one part of it. Also, that's where the nuclear weapons systems reside. So both America's nuclear weapons are Department of Energy, again, not Department of Defense, even if they're administered from the Department of Defense. And then the cyber piece. And I was very interested in their cybersecurity because it came down to, what if someone hacks the electrical grid of America or the nuclear weapon system of America, sort of the highest value targets that we have. And I don't remember the name of the gentleman I was interviewing, but what he described to me was a philosophy that presumes that they are under constant attack. So that they operate on the assumption that 24 hours a day they are being hacked. And that they just have layers of gates where there's 10 walls, basically. They're assuming that basically they're in a constant state of breach, and that they manage themselves as if they are always in breach, such that there's layer upon layer upon layer, which seemed logical to me, because I didn't know that felt like a good answer to me, which is, how could you tell me you can create 100% security when the whole world is constantly trying to get in? And so I'm interested how that relates to what you're offering.
Yeah, so you've just described something that's really important, and an assumed breach model is what we call zero trust. It's a zero trust security framework that assumes that you should not trust anyone in an organization, anyone or any endpoint. Everything has to be monitored, secured, and protected. So the zero trust environment, this technology that we actually use at Keeper is actually the cloak, right? It's one of the cornerstones that covers everything that we build. So we have two fundamentals. Whenever we build any type of new product or feature, it has to be two things from a security perspective. Number one, it has to be zero trust, and that falls under an assumed breach model. That means that we have complete visibility, security, control, and reporting over every user as they access every endpoint, application, and system in an organization. So we can track everything that you're doing and monitor you to make sure that you're safeguarded and that you only have access to the systems, applications, and websites that you need to conduct your job, right? So it wouldn't make sense for you to have access to something in finance if that's not, where you're relegated, right? So that's,
if you work in marketing,
this is important. And then with zero knowledge, which is the second point, zero knowledge is a model that basically says that you as the end user or the customer is always in complete control or knowledge of your master password and the domain and control of your encryption keys for decrypting and encrypting your information. That is critical, because you don't want that operation done at the vendor side, and you certainly don't want the encryption keys stored where the data resides, because if that data is stolen and the cyber criminals are able to access the keys, they can decrypt all your information. So that's really it.
And so how long have you existed? How long has Keeper existed?
We just finished our 11th year. So we're in our 12th now.
And what is your perspective on both the nature of the threat today compared to a decade ago, and the nature of general security? Are we generally, in terms of our own behavior, are we behaving in a way that creates more or less security as time passes? Are we adopting practices?
Yeah, so there's several questions there. So number one, we've seen the threat landscape become more virulent, right? It's far more frequent. There's a lot more players. They're state sponsored. This is not about billions of dollars anymore. It's actually about trillions of dollars, right? So when you look at ransomware, every few seconds, somebody or an organization, either an individual or an organization globally, is paying a ransom. And that can be anywhere from $500 all the way up to tens of millions. We've seen ransoms north of $50 million, right, in the press. So this is a huge problem. And we call it the quiet cyber war. There is a cyber war going on, right? So, for example, our systems, we bolster our systems, but we monitor attack vectors 24/7, 365. and organizations are constantly getting breached. And this is a huge problem. And I would say that where we've really seen the problem grow is not as much in the mid-market enterprise. That issue is always going to be there. But in the SOHO and SMB, and that go-to-market segment where you have small office, home office, like individuals that are working out of their homes, running businesses, or a small to medium-sized enterprise, that cohort, that population, that's north of 400 million organizations globally. That represents about 90% of the global domestic product and about 95% of the employment base. The cyber criminal organizations, they're now forming large cartels. That's what we call them, cyber criminal cartels. The top 25 generate tens of billions of dollars, and they spend most of their time attacking SOHOs and SMBs. And so the SOHOs and SMBs, over the course of time, we're finally starting to see greater protections and software that they can use. And this is one of the focal areas of our business, not just the mid-market enterprise, which we're quite astute at. It's really around protecting that large cohort, that 400 plus million, because, you know, they were just a few years ago, they were nascent. Not enough organizations in the industry were protecting them. So today we're starting to see more vendors really focus on developing solutions that can take care of them. So.
And the primary, it's interesting because you say the primary point of entry is stealing people's login and password.
That's right.
One way, you know, 1,000 different ways to do it. So it's not some super secret backdoor through Google and the CIA and the FBI, and now I'm inside your system. It's I figured out that your password is your wife's last name 123 or whatever, you know, your dog or whatever it is. How do they do that?
Okay, so
I mean, because it's been stolen. In other words, or do they? Is there what? How does that?
It's super simple. So cyber criminals breach public websites, and there's all kinds of websites. You hear about these data breaches all the time.
Equifax and all this.
That's right. So they breach the site, and let's just say they aggregate from one breach 20 million stolen login credentials. That means a username and a password. They take that 20 million, that data set, and they place it on the dark web, which is their secret little, it's the subterranean internet. And that is the marketplace. There's a series of marketplaces there where they can buy and sell login credentials among each other. And they take these login credentials, the more affluent cyber criminals that are proficient, they take them, they aggregate them, and they dictionary them. And they will dictionary them and they will list out, let's just say, for example, what are the top 25 most commonly used passwords, right? And
in the
credentials
whole, out of the 20 million.
That's right. And guess what? When we did this analysis over the past few years. And what we found was that the top 25 stolen login credentials that were the most common were used upwards of 50% of the time. Example, 1234, password, admin, 12345, QWERTY, right? These are just a few examples on the top 20.
You're saying half of the passwords are in this category of all passwords.
That's
whether
right.
Whether the password.
That's right. And this is we did this analysis where it's just like, my God, right? So they know that's the first thing. The second thing that they know is that 60% of the time, roughly, an individual uses the same password for all of their sites and applications. They don't have, like, for example,
if I get the one from Equifax, so if I get the Equifax, and then I go back and use the same thing to try to get into whatever the bank or the brokerage account or whatever, there's a good chance that it's the same password that.
Absolutely. They focus.
And then is there liability when those public? Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, they focus on, it's all about math. Right. So think of it like an actuary. How would they analyze data? They analyze data like a scientist, and they say, okay, what are the common, used passwords? What's the probability that this individual reuses? Where does this individual spend their time online? They can find that information because of social media, right? They can get a tremendous amount of information on an individual, right? They know if somebody, for example, is traveling on vacation to Mexico, that maybe they're not home, right? So it's not just about, right, maybe you come back and your cars are stolen. It goes far beyond just data theft. It's also now becoming a convergence of data and other physical assets that are all part of this organizational nefarious scheme. So,
But it does sound like, at least at the mid-level, and I'm sure at the high level, Department of Energy being an example,
yeah,
that the level of sophistication on cyber defense is also the highest it's ever been.
it is. And I think zero trust is a mandate now. We go back to zero trust. It's an executive order by the president. Why is this important? Because if I don't make sure that you have access to very specific websites, applications, and systems, if every user is isolated in a zero trust environment and there's a data breach, the worst scenario that you could have is when a cyber criminal can move laterally, horizontally through an organization and start aggregating a massive amount of data. If you do not operate with a zero trust framework, you're in serious trouble, because there's nothing stopping them from that horizontal lateral movement, right? To go from finance to accounting to HR to design to engineering. That is the main reason. That is the main reason why zero trust is so important. So,
well, I will say that going back to my Department of Energy interview years ago,
yeah.
the biggest source of security they had was that the vast majority of the American electrical grid had not been updated in any way since Dwight Eisenhower at the most recent, so since 1950.
Mm-hmm.
And the greatest form of cybersecurity is extremely outdated infrastructure that it's not connected to anything and it can't connect to anything.
Yeah.
You know, the whole idea of the smart grid, that they said, well, the one advantage of not having a smart grid is having a dumb grid means you can't hack it.
Yeah. Then you have to look out for what we call insider threats, right? Mm-hmm. So cybersecurity is based on mitigating external threats and also insider threats. So just because you have a standalone system that you believe is controlled by, let's just call it an internal network, right, where it's not available for access from the internet, you have to still be concerned about internal controls. And this is what we call privileged access management. And this is why it was created. It was created to mitigate the risk of an insider creating a problem, right? So here's an example. If I'm working at the Department of Energy, what you wouldn't want is you wouldn't want a member of, let's just say, an IT organization with any company, right? Impersonating Dylan. Somebody impersonates you that otherwise wouldn't have access to a particular system. They impersonate a user and create another profile, and now they're accessing and harvesting data that they shouldn't otherwise receive. And then somebody, let's say, goes off and starts selling it or trading it on the dark web. So internal controls, internal safeguards are super important, irrespective of whether it's the Department of Energy or any organization. You've got to protect against the insider and external threat.
Darren, it's a pleasure. I would say that the most insightful thing in this discussion was the fact that 50% of all passwords are one of 25 things. That's on the one hand, it's not surprising. On the other hand, it's horrifying and surprising. Anyway, the company Keeper Cybersecurity. What's the website again, Darren?
The website is keepersecurity.com.
Keepersecurity.com. This is Bootstrapping. I'm Dylan Ratigan. You're watching Tasty Live. We're back after this.